I'm very honored to have Graham Hancock with me here today, and we are at the 12-12-12 conference in Arkansas. And Graham, welcome, and thank you so much for the presentation you've just made.
Thank you. Thank you.
You spoke a lot about the parallel dimensions, about visionary plants, and I certainly have had a similar path in which...
so interesting that we've been on this parallel track.
Well, I lived outside the United States a great number of years, and spent 9 years in South America. And I had the opportunity to try Ayahuasca in Bolivia, and it had a profound effect on me. And certainly wasn't recreational, but it opened me up to view the truth. I saw many of the things about myself that I needed to correct. And
exactly the same experience with me. I encountered ayahuasca initially because I was researching a book.
Yes.
And I've always been a hands-on researcher. That's why I spent 6 or 7 years scuba diving, looking for underwater ruins.
Right.
And when it came to the impact of altered states of consciousness on human evolution and on the human story, it was obvious that I had to go and experience those states of consciousness myself. And I chose to work with shamans in the Amazon jungle. And what began as a research project transformed into a life's work for me, because when I drank ayahuasca, it had a transformatory effect on me. And I realized, although it's very difficult and very painful sometimes, the experience, both physically and emotionally, that I was learning important lessons from it, and that I needed to learn those lessons.
Did you have the deep experience the first time that you did it?
No, I didn't. It took a few sessions before I started to have what I would describe as really deep experiences, which challenged me and faced me with things that I needed to deal with, and also opened up for me what I could only describe as seamlessly convincing parallel realms, where I encountered other intelligences that were communicating with me telepathically. This did not happen overnight. It was work, and I think actually it's often the case that ayahuasca has, not with everybody, but ayahuasca has work to do with our bodies first, before it reveals those realms, and we need to cleanse and purify.
Well, it's interesting. In my case, I told a brief story about how a coincidence occurred where I met a shaman in Bolivia, not the one that I was necessarily originally looking for, but turned out to be someone that I felt a lot of connection to, and is an absolute master.
Right.
And the first time that I did it, I did have the experience, and he didn't expect that to occur. The same thing happened when I went back 6 months later. What happened that first time was in many ways like what my Christian upbringing would describe as the judgment. I went through an entire process of feeling the pain and hurt from the source, from people that I'd heard, from their perspective, and went through my entire life that way. And then the reverse, where everyone that had ever hurt me or programmed me, particularly my father, I spent a lot of time releasing, but it felt like real time. And I was so happy when I started waking up to realize that I was still alive. I still had a chance, and I could get it right. And absolutely, when I came out of that experience, I made phone calls to people to let them know, 35 years ago, I did something with you that I'm not proud of.
Please forgive me.
Please forgive me.
I've been through that same process myself. Over the years, I first started drinking ayahuasca in late 2003, and since then, it's been an almost yearly practice for me. I've had about 40 sessions with ayahuasca, and I learn something new every time, and that judgment, that sense of being in the judgment or what might be called the hall of judgment
Yes.
in the ancient Egyptian tradition. That came through strongest to me really quite recently, just a year or so ago, in Brazil, in a series of 5 sessions. I had, prior to that, already had many realizations that I wasn't perhaps such a nice guy as I thought I was, and that I had caused pain, and that I needed forgiveness, and that also there were people to forgive. But in terms of a rigorous, focused experience of that, it was really only just over a year ago. I had what I would just describe as an absolutely life-changing experience, in which I was able to integrate all of the lessons that I'd learned before and put them into practice in my life ahead.
Well, as we were talking in our presentations, the one that I just gave, I do believe that, particularly with the bombardment of plasma onto the planet, that there will be more and more locations in which the ionic ratio shifts, in which people can go and meditate and have vision quest and fast and have experience. But I tried it both ways, and I did do for 7 years 5-day fast.
Yes.
And yet what occurred with me for ayahuasca in 4 hours never occurred in the same way with 7 years of fasting. I did gain by the fasting. And no question.
Of course you did, yeah.
But what happened was a different lens and an accelerated, amplified process. And
now, ayahuasca is undoubtedly a very powerful plant ally, and behind it, I am certain, lies a vast intelligence.
Yes.
I think of her as, in a way, the mother goddess of our planet, who is using ayahuasca to reach us at the level of consciousness, because we've become so shut down from the realm of spirit in this material world that you need to break through that barrier. And I totally agree with you, there are many ways to break through that barrier. But ayahuasca is peculiarly effective, and that's because of the intelligence that lies behind it.
And I think it's unfortunate that even people who are spiritual, even people who are involved in metaphysics, tend to class visionary plants as an impure way, as a lesser way.
Such a mistake.
That the thing to do is to fast or to pray or to have the vision questing. What occurred for me through the sacred plants medicines, which I did in a sacred way, and I did have the experience with the mushrooms, with the peyote, with the San Pedro, and with the ayahuasca. Unquestionably, the ayahuasca was the huge one. And but what occurred there, as the shaman expressed to me, I completed karma from 10 lifetimes in 4 hours. It took me out of time far more effectively than the other ones, and it was a different lens, a different vibration, but far more powerful an experience.
Absolutely. No, I think that you're right. I mean, people have a kind of knee-jerk reaction to this, and they may even be people who are deeply involved in metaphysics, and they say, oh, somehow this is artificial, or you are just using a drug, and that's a quick shortcut. How can you get enlightenment that way? And it's almost a kind of snobbishness in a way.
Absolutely.
That they believe that their method is superior to
There's a
self-righteousness about it, and that is so wrong. I think the truth is, no method is superior. We have many ways to pass through the veil and to see the unseen reality that surrounds us. And what's right for one person may not be right for another person. And fortunately, nature has gifted us, the universe has gifted us with many doorways through the veil. And ayahuasca is one of those doorways. And I have to say, from my experience, an enormously effective one. But I would not put down somebody else who said, well, I don't want to take ayahuasca, I want to get there totally by fasting. Absolutely, go for it. That's right and proper. But what that person shouldn't do is then turn around and say, and your method of getting there is inferior to mine, because that's not the case. And in fact, ayahuasca is extremely hard work, as we both know, both at the level of taking the brew, which involves quite severe physical and emotional and psychic consequences, but also at the level of what you do afterwards. That's really where the work begins. This is what I try to get across to people. This is not a magic pill.
Yes.
This is something that is going to open your eyes to what you need to do. And actually doing that, that's the work. That is the work, and that can take years. To overcome a lifetime of bad habits, to overcome a lifetime of negativity, to gradually transform it into something pure and decent and good, that takes work, and it takes constant application, and you can never, never, never let up. So I regard, and I'm grateful to Ayahuasca for setting me on the path, but that is a path of work that I have to do if I'm going to gain anything from it at all. I have to do the work.
Well, I find that I had the unique experience of being an expatriate, being a foreigner for 33 years and coming back, and had a bit of a culture shock coming back into my own country.
Mm-hmm.
But I really was intrigued by your talk, and I've always been drawn to the words of Socrates that says my citizenship is the world and my nationality is goodwill.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I think that there is a time now for us to start to move together.
Yeah, to realize that we are one.
Yeah.
We are one.
Yes.
Humanity is one. We cannot be artificially divided by
Yes.
borders and boundaries and by artificial constructs like one religion or another, or by the color of our skin,
Yes.
or by our economic situation.
Yes.
We cannot be divided by this. We
Yes.
are one. And in the great totality, the oneness of humanity, we need to seek out like-minded folk who are like us and who we can construct something good with.
Yes.
And that cannot be defined by where we happened by accident to be born, or by the religion, but by chance we were born into and it was inculcated into us by our parents. We have to find our own way. That's why I make a strong emphasis on this whole issue of sovereignty over consciousness and adult responsibility.
Absolutely.
We must be sovereign over ourselves.
Absolutely.
And anything that works against that, we ourselves have to overcome it.
Absolutely.
And move forward.
2012 it represents so many different things to so many people. I really believe that 2012 is perhaps an expansion into greater awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I think that perhaps the coronal mass ejections, the plasma, are a mechanism of this.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think you're very probably right about that.
and I think that it is if we were going to say ascension, it is the planet that is perhaps ascending or transitioning,
taking us along with it.
and that it will take humanity another 10,
Yeah.
12, 15 generations
Yeah.
en masse. I think that there are certainly enlightened people,
Yeah.
and I consider you to be one, a great teacher. But I think humanity en masse are going to wake up on the 22nd of December and say, what was the big deal? But I think the matrix will have changed, and the possibility for us to move forward exists.
Well, I think what's going on is that we're on the road to change.
Yes.
And just as with the lessons we learned from Ayahuasca, so also as a species,
Yes.
there's work to be done.
Yes.
There's a lot of work to be done. It's not a magical thing, the 21st
Yes.
of December 2012. As you
Yes.
say, we do not all wake up on the 22nd transformed.
Exactly.
We have to
Yeah.
transform ourselves, and that work will be long and hard. And many inimical forces are raged against it, which are I believe specifically designed to suppress human consciousness and to deny us the chance of the great potential that the universe has gifted us with. And overcoming those inimical forces is a long and difficult work, and there will be ups and downs, and there will be losses as well as gains, and there will be suffering that has to be gone through. When you confront a powerful dark force, you have to expect that it is going to make it very difficult for you to overcome it. But that is, I love your phrase, the universe of duality, the university of duality.
University of duality.
That is the lesson that we're here to learn. And it's an important lesson to learn. It's an important lesson because what is fundamental about the human being is the power of choice, that we have the power of choice. That's really what defines us, the choices we make through life. And in this university of duality, those are choices between good and evil in very, very simple terms. and they are, both of those things are there to teach us.
Yes.
They're there to teach us. They're there to allow us to learn and grow and to develop, and gradually, perhaps through many lifetimes, to learn to make the right choices rather than the wrong.
I heard the phrase once that there's a doctor on Earth called Cause and Effect, and he makes house calls.
That's a good one. Yeah, yeah. And you know, I also resonate what you said about places on the planet and how those can affect our consciousness, and you know, perhaps there was at one time an ancient science of this. That,
yes, absolutely.
That you know, if we put ourselves in the right place and perform the right ceremony, this also can have a huge effect on consciousness and help us again to grow and learn and develop.
And I think that while we think of the campestral societies such as the Native Americans, the Aborigines, the tribesmen who recognized certain places as places of vision, I think there were also before that a highly advanced society that knew how to align to stellar grids to perceive
the ancient notion, as above, so below, is profound.
Yes.
And it carries an enormous meaning. And it once was a system that was deliberately and carefully used for the benefit of mankind. And that's another thing we need to recover. But we have work ahead. It's fascinating, actually.
Well, you know, you speak about the need for us to have sovereignty, to recognize that there is something that tries to hold us back, and perhaps on a higher level, it is just the nature of our own purposed dream to have that duality aspect that forces us to learn how to master it. But I think our past societies, I think that certain societies that had a very high spiritual level probably didn't learn how to handle violence, probably didn't learn how to stop when that aggressive thing.
Absolutely, and our society is like that today. Our society today has not learned how to handle violence.
What would be the way that we handle that? How do we stop that without fighting head to head? You know, the statement that we'll never stop war by hating war, we'll stop it by loving peace.
Well, this is a complicated story. You know, because at one level, there are certain dark forces manifesting through the human creature, which use violence in such a calculated, horrific, vicious way that, unfortunately, possibly the only way to stop them is with counter-violence. I'm sad to say that, but I take the case of Hitler, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take the case of Hitler. That was a demonic force loose in the world in human form, and that demonic force absolutely had to be stopped. It wouldn't. You couldn't wish that away. You know, you had to, at a certain point, you had to stop that. And in a strange way, I regard myself as a pacifist, but in a strange way, that was a righteous war. That war had to be fought.
I'll tell you something fascinating that's occurred to me before. I think that demonic force that we talked about with the Hitler regime surfaced a few centuries earlier as the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, my goodness.
And here's what
such wickedness.
Here's what I've considered. I believe it was 1588, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. In the belly of those ships was the Spanish Inquisition, an enormous army backed by several countries in Europe that were coming to take Queen Elizabeth out of power and install the Spanish Inquisition. But something happened. Something miraculous happened, seemingly against all odds, where those ships were destroyed by a force of nature. I've often wondered what caused that. Was that somehow a force that reached back in to alter a possible path, that we have these probable realities that can go certain ways? Is it possible that the defeat of the Spanish Armada was a greater part of human consciousness that diverted it away from that particular path?
Very interesting idea.
In order for us to move into the ascension.
Very interesting idea. I think it is possible. The Spanish Inquisition was just one of the most grotesque instruments of evil that has ever been inflicted on the human race, and you know, its impact in many, many places. I spoke earlier today in my presentation about the cathars. You know,
yes,
the organization was involved in
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You know, it had to be stopped.
Yeah.
And in the case that you're talking about now, the universe seems to have come to our aid.
And you know, I wonder about these ideas of probable realities and sort of a Rubik's cube that we as a collective consciousness put together, and perhaps all these realities do exist, but the one we choose that leads to ascension is one of many. But perhaps in some sort of way, we have already ascended. Maybe there's some part that comes back and helps navigate certain aspects of incidents like the Spanish Armada.
Well, you know, it's not a bit.
Perhaps even stopped Hitler from developing atomic weapons.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, the odds were that with his scientists that he could have done that.
I know,
but something happened.
I know. Well, it's as though the universe selected certain people at that time to come forward and confront this demon.
Yes, absolutely.
And face him down. He couldn't be wished away. He had to be stopped.
Exactly.
And the personalities were needed who would come out and stop him. And he was stopped. And so that can happen again.
And it gives you the idea that there is hope.
It does. And you know that the ancient notion
against the odds.
Yeah. The notion of the guardian angel. You know, that there are angelic as well as demonic forces.
Yes.
This, to me, is a very important idea.
Well, I think I shared with you the story that Ed and I had in Africa, where we literally should have been killed by a hippopotamus. And we were chased, and 75 witnesses watched it, and it appeared as if it hit Bergwala. It just stopped, and not that we were any sort of highly advanced souls. I just think that each person has some sort of higher self that can prevent things from taking you out of the course you have planned for yourself.
When that's a course you need to complete.
Exactly.
And it's not your time.
That you don't want to have to come back and start all over again, and so there are forces that come to play to lead you toward
what's very interesting, very, very interesting. And you know, the notion of the guardian angel does fit in with that.
Absolutely.
I had what I realize now was a fundamental and transformatory experience when I was 16 years old. And in a way, some kind of mysterious intervention took place then too, which was that I was alone in my parents' house. They were away for the weekend. And I was barefoot and washing the dishes, and my hands were wet. And for some reason, I felt I wanted to check that an electric plug was plugged in properly. I reached down my hand without looking, and the back was off the plug. And I'm standing in a puddle of water with wet hands, and I touch a live wire. And I had the most gigantic electric shock. But instead of being stuck to that pole, I was thrown across the room, and I hit the opposite wall, and I slumped down on the floor. And at that moment, for me, was the beginning of a kind of initiation for me, because I left my body. And I was up around the light, as many people speak. I was out of my body, and I was looking down at my physical body there on the ground. And I was not afraid. I thought, how interesting.
That's very interesting.
What's going to happen next? And then I was back into my body again. And I came out. It wasn't my time to step out of this physical life. Something stopped that shock.
I wonder if we have certain potential exit points along the path.
Interesting.
In which there are crossroads.
Yeah.
And that the path that we really want to take, the path that we've really chosen for ourselves, in certain ways allows us to have an overview for a second and then come back in.
Yeah, very interesting. That's kind of what it was like. It's kind of what it was like, and you know, I decided not to take my exit.
Well, you know, as much as I look at things and hear things, I'm not one to adhere to conspiracy theories, but I absolutely am opposed to putting our head in the sand and acting like things like the Illuminati don't exist. They absolutely do.
I'm completely with you. We must not put our heads in the sand, and we must not pretend that it is a kind of all woo-woo goodness. You know?
Yes.
As you say, I heard you say it, love is not enough without strength.
Excellent.
There has to be love and strength, and,
And
sometimes we must be strong.
And so many people in spirituality want to put on the rose-colored glasses
Yeah.
and pretend that evil doesn't exist,
Exactly.
and that doesn't work. That's not the answer. And I agree with you. There are certain situations where certain evils have to be stopped, and maybe that is one of the big quantum leaps that we need to learn how to make, to stop things without becoming the very energy that we're stopping.
Well, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Without becoming evil ourselves.
Well, you know,
That's the
so
key.
many people that deal with negativity, unfortunately, such as not all, but some people that are in law enforcement become corrupted by dealing with the very energy that they're trying to stop. And it's a harmonic oscillation to a certain degree. Where if you're around that, I do believe that quote-unquote psychic attack things can occur.
They can.
And I believe that we do have a magnetic field around ourselves, and we have to be very careful about what energies that get in there. And it is so easy to try to stop negativity in such a way that we become the very thing we're trying to stop.
Exactly. That's the challenge, actually.
Yeah.
That's the challenge, to deal in this university of duality.
Yes.
To deal with the negative pole
Yeah.
and not become negative ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good way to phrase it. Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's absolutely been an honor.
Tremendous talk to you.
You are a tremendous person, a
Thank
great
you.
inspiration.
Thank
to
you.
many.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the wonderful thing as well is that so many people that become known for their expertise, for their writing, for their mastery, get caught up in the trap of ego. And your sharing, your open heart is absolutely the mark of a master, and I honor you. I really acknowledge you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for having me here. It's been a
No,
great
it's been
experience.
an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Our next speaker will be Graham Hancock, and the topic of this next presentation is extremely profound, very, very important, and extremely cutting edge. And this is what Graham does, and it takes courage to bring this kind of information, this kind of knowledge. And again, as I've said before, Graham is one of the most admired presenters in the era of the new Earth, the new discoveries, understanding our true heritage and understanding who we truly are and how we can explore our own consciousness. It takes courage because it would seem as if there are organizations that don't want us to expand, that there are organized forces that want to block our movement forward. And so this next topic is extremely important, extremely profound, and absolutely one of the highlights of this gathering. So he is one of the most articulate speakers that I have ever met, and a pleasure to listen to, and the intelligence and penetrating information that he's going to provide is absolutely astonishing. So a round of applause for Graham Hancock.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin with a thank you to all those kind people who yesterday took the trouble to log on and register an account with Amazon.co.uk and advance order some copies of my novel War God. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm in the process of trying to persuade my publishers that I am worthy as a fiction author, and they're very skeptical. So if my friends around the world go to Amazon UK and pre-order this book, and you're not charged now, you're only charged when the book is mailed to you. It helps me a great deal. Thank you very much for those who did so. The talk I'm giving today relates to the subject matter covered in these three books, which include in the middle my first novel, Entangled, which was given to me in a series of ayahuasca visions in Brazil. I was given this story and I was told to tell it. It's the story of the battle of good against evil. And it's a time travel novel that brings together two young women are brought together by an angel to do battle with a demon who travels through time. And one of these young women lives 24,000 years ago, and the other lives today in modern Los Angeles. So it's entangled in the sense that time is a cat's cradle, not an arrow. And in the sense that these two young women are brought together to do battle with evil. And this book, Entangled, does come with a health warning because there's darkness in it. I found that I couldn't deal with the subject of human evil without expressing what it is. I don't believe it's something that we can wish away. I do think there is such a thing as evil. I think we have to confront it in ourselves, and I think we have to confront it in the world. And it takes courage in order to do that. And this book deals with that issue. And the other two books, Supernatural deals with altered states of consciousness, shamanism, and parallel realms, the invisible realm that surrounds us all, and the Master Game concerns a secret tradition of how to live in this world that has been passed down through ancient Egypt into modern times. And I'm going to be moving across the themes that are covered in all three of these books in the talk that I give now. And I apologize in advance that it may be that I will offend some folk in what I'm going to say today. And that some of what I say may not be palatable. But I do my best to speak my truth as it comes to me through the years of research and through the experiences that I have had. I think that all of us, everyone in this room, we would not be human if we didn't ask at some point in our lives, and perhaps often, the question, what happens to us when we die? To be honest, when I was in my 20s, I didn't ask myself that question very often. I kind of felt immortal. But now that I'm 62, I do find myself asking that question more often, and I do find it matters. In fact, I think it is the fundamental question of human life. What are we doing here? Does our life have meaning? Is that meaning in some sense assessed after our deaths? Do we go on, or do we just stop? Now, if you go to mainstream science, which is in the business of weighing, measuring, and counting, and which modern Western science has been responsible for many good things, but modern Western science is profoundly materialist. It has a reference frame, which is that there is nothing outside the realm of matter, that we may be reduced to matter. There is nothing more to us than matter. That's the reference frame of modern science. It's not my reference frame. Not at all. But if you ask a scientist what happens to us when we die, it's interesting to see what they said. Here is this chap, Professor Richard Dawkins, the author of the book called The Selfish Gene, and more recently of a book called The God Delusion. He had the rather Orwellian title of the Professor of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University. He is an incredibly eloquent speaker, and to give him credit, a very clever man at a certain level, but also, I believe, in some ways, a very foolish man. And I think he's been responsible for misleading millions of people around the world as to fundamental issues to do with the nature of reality. So when Richard Dawkins was asked, how do you prepare for death in a world where there isn't a God? I mean, talk about a leading question, where there isn't a God. And Dawkins' reply is interesting. Part of his reply I can accept, that life is what we have, so we'd better live our life to the full. I agree, we should live our lives to the full. But part of what he says I can't accept, that we have to live our lives to the full because there is nothing after it. I wonder how he knows that. I wonder what science that is based on. What research has he done? What experiments has he done? Which allows him to stand up there as the professor of the public understanding of science and says there is nothing after death. That is not a scientific statement. As a matter of fact, that is the statement of Professor Dawkins' own
particularly dark and narrow religious point of view. He is making a statement of his belief there. He passionately believes that there is no life after death, that consciousness cannot survive death. But he is wrong to present that as a scientific fact. He's welcome to his beliefs, but this is not a fact. And I think many people have been deluded by Dawkins' persuasive presence into believing that there is no meaning and purpose in life simply because he is this highfalutin geneticist and professor. So if you go to science and ask for the definition of death, the widely used legal definition is the complete cessation of brain function as evidenced by absence of brainwave activity on an electroencephalogram. Okay. But hang on. We are not our brains. Surely we are more than our brains. We all instinctively know that. We are our consciousness. That is what makes a human being. That is who we are. We are our consciousness. And my goodness, science has absolutely no idea what consciousness is. Honest scientists will admit it is the hard problem. We do not know what consciousness is. We do not know how these few pounds of jelly inside our skulls transmute experiences like love, like joy, our reaction to a beautiful sunset or to a symphony. How can that be reduced to matter in the way that science wishes to do? And the truth is that all we can say about our brains and consciousness is that our brains are related to consciousness in some vital way. But exactly what that vital way is by no means completely clear. Mainstream science has a reference frame on consciousness. And rather like Professor Dawkins' statement that I showed a moment ago, this reference frame is just taken for granted by most scientists and never even investigated or questioned. And that is that our brains make consciousness, generate it, manufacture it, rather in the way that a factory makes cars. If you hold that view, that our brains generate consciousness, then it is impossible for you to believe in life after death. If you think that your consciousness is simply an epiphenomenon of brain activity, which is what mainstream science says, then when your brain is dead, you as a scientist, as a materialist, have to say, yeah, there's no life after death. It's over. We're just meat. We were always just meat. That is the view of science. There is nothing. It's just a total accident. The universe, the planet, these incredibly amazing bodies that the universe has gifted us, the experience of a human being, all of that was just nothing. Because our brains make consciousness, and when the brain is broken and the brain is dead, consciousness ceases. And a scientist will say, but I can prove to you that the brain generates consciousness. And you say, how? How do you prove that? And the scientist says, well, if I damage that area of your brain, a particular area of your consciousness will disappear. And that's true. People with brain damage do have their consciousness radically affected by it. And the scientist says, so that proves the brain makes consciousness. But there's a problem. There's something that science is not considering, something that it desperately needs to consider, that their reference frame may be wrong, that the relationship of consciousness to the brain may not be like the relationship of a factory making cars. It may be much more like the relationship of a TV signal to a TV set. I'm using an analogy here. And you know it's true. If you break a bit of your TV screen, the picture won't be so good. But the signal is still there. You know, you can take a brick and throw it right through that television screen and smash it to pieces, and that might be a really good idea. But the signal is still there. Maybe that's what the brain is doing with consciousness. Maybe the brain is the transceiver of consciousness, which manifests consciousness onto this material plane. And that fits in with all the world's ancient spiritual traditions, that we incarnate in these bodies, that we are souls, that we are spirits, and the body allows us to manifest and experience on the material plane. But it is not the essence of us. The essence of us is our consciousness, is our soul, is our spirit. And underlying much of what I'm going to say today is this possibility that the brain does not generate consciousness, but that it receives and manifests consciousness onto the physical plane. And actually on this issue of life after death, setting aside the dogmas and prejudices of science, I think any reasonable person should be willing to admit that at the least it's a 50-50 shot. I mean, we don't know. Nobody can know for sure. I think I'm surrounded by like-minded people. We all in this room do know that life goes on, that this is a stage in our journey, not the whole of our journey. But just looking at it from the point of view of rational argument, at the very least, we have to say it's a 50-50 shot. And then we have all the incredible evidence of reincarnation, of out-of-body and near-death experiences, which have been recounted through human culture and even by some scientists. And when we take all that extra evidence into account, even if most science won't buy into it, I think to the rational person, it's got to tip the balance and say at least 51 or 52%, yes, we do survive death, and 49 or 48% we don't. And that's just at the level of reason. So none of that data is explained by the mainstream paradigm. So I think if we want to know about the mystery of life and death, the very last people we should be talking to are scientists like Richard Dawkins. They are, in fact, pygmies in this matter, and really have nothing to offer us at all except their particularly dark vision of the nature of reality. So where can we learn about this mystery that so directly affects us all? Well, one place I think that we need to go to and consider seriously is ancient Egypt, because the ancient Egyptians put their best minds to work for 3,000 years to considering nothing other than this mystery. It was the fundamental concern of their civilization. What happens to us when we die? And they came to very specific and definite answers about that question. That our life is our opportunity to prepare for the journey that we will make after death. And that immortal life is ultimately our birthright. And what we see in this image is the goddess Isis offering Ankh, immortal life, the life of millions of years, to the pharaoh Seti I. This is not simply a nice work of art. This is a transformatory image, and it's expressing a deep truth of which the ancient Egyptians were profoundly aware, and which was the result of a long and detailed investigation of the nature of reality. Santha took these two photographs as a deliberate double exposure. The photograph in the background is of the Great Pyramid of Giza. As is well known, the Great Pyramid of Giza is completely uninscribed. There are no texts inside it. It is mute, or appears to be, and anonymous. The photograph in the foreground is taken in the tomb chamber of the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, a pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. And that chamber is inscribed with enormously detailed texts. And those texts are called the pyramid texts. And I would maintain that, to cut a long story short, that these pyramid texts are the software and the Great Pyramid is the hardware for a great investigation and exploration of what happens to us after we die. And what is expressed in these texts is indeed of the profoundest nature. They're very beautiful to look at, the pyramid texts. Beautiful hieroglyphs, glowing with life. And they are the first, the oldest surviving representatives of a long body of knowledge that the ancient Egyptians passed down to us, which the best known, of course, is the Book of the Dead, so called because it was written on papyrus scrolls and buried with the deceased. The ancient Egyptian coffin texts, so called because they were written inside coffin lids. the book of what is in the duat, which you can see painted around the walls of many tombs, and the oldest of all, the pyramid texts. But actually they're all one system of thought, one system of exploration and inquiry into the nature of life and death. The ancient Egyptians tell us that when we die, our souls will make a journey. And that journey unfolds in a curious parallel universe that they called the duat, the afterlife kingdom. And at one level, the duat is a region of the sky. In fact, it is that very region of the sky that I showed yesterday between the constellations of Orion and Leo divided by the Milky Way that is memorialized on the ground at Giza in gigantic architecture. And at another level, it's an underworld of corridors and passageways and chambers through which our soul must pass after death, often led by the psychopomp Anubis, the guide of souls, who guides us on that journey. And I maintain that it's impossible really to get to grips with the complex ideas expressed in the pyramid texts and the later literature unless we take account of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And it's impossible to get to grips with the Great Pyramid of Egypt unless we take account of those texts, those amazing texts. I would say, in fact, that what we're dealing with in the Great Pyramid is an initiatory instrument, an instrument in which heightened states of consciousness were explored, in which the initiate was placed within the Great Pyramid in total darkness to overcome his or her own fears and to manifest higher consciousness. And I would suggest that journey began down here in the subterranean chamber, the oldest part of the Great Pyramid, deep beneath the earth. And it's kind of cleaned up today, but to get a sense of how scary the subterranean chamber once was, you just need to look at how it looked before it was cleaned up. This dark and gloomy and terrifying place beneath the Great Pyramid. And then as you come up from the subterranean chamber, you come up what is called, well, it's actually called the descending corridor. It's about 300 feet long, perfectly straight, sloping down into the earth at an angle of 26 degrees. You need to be, in this sort of posture or even crawling to go up and down it. It's about 3 feet 5 inches high and 3 feet 5 inches wide. And into the wall of that descending corridor, there's this aperture cut here, and that leads up this curious system, which is called the well shaft, to join up higher in the pyramid with the main corridor and passageway system. The well shaft running up there. So let's continue our journey now. We'll go up the descending corridor until we come to its junction with what is called the ascending corridor, just over there. And we find ourselves in the next corridor climbing further up into the body of the pyramid. And again, to get a sense of what that looked like in the early days, once we come to this junction point between the ascending corridor and the grand gallery and the horizontal corridor, that's how it looked. That chap is standing in front of the entrance to the horizontal corridor that leads to the so-called Queen's Chamber. And we'll just go into the Queen's Chamber here, along that horizontal corridor. There's a step in it. At first you're crouching, and then you stand up, and then you enter the Queen's Chamber. By the way, these names, Queen's Chamber, King's Chamber, they've all been given to these chambers by, archaeologists. So, we don't know what the ancient Egyptians called them, but I don't believe they called them that, because this structure was never created as the tomb of a pharaoh. This is something much more profound than that. Those holes in the wall of the Queen's Chamber, one in the north, one in the south, point at the stars, point at the star Sirius, the one we're looking at there. We come back out of the Queen's Chamber, back along the horizontal corridor, and we find ourselves at the base of the Grand Gallery, which is one of the striking features, architectural features of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and I'm sure many in this room have been there and have stood in the Grand Gallery and just wondered, how did they do that? You know, it's an amazing thing to do. And if we look at the older photographs of it, today it's nicely lit up, not so scary, but you go there with the lights out or lit by candlelight, and it seems like a very different place as you work your way upwards into this kind of Stygian gloom, climbing up and up and up towards the great chamber system that is called the King's Chamber. And when you get to the top of the Grand Gallery, I'll show a cross-section here. There you are, that's the top of the Grand Gallery. And there's you have to stoop under a low doorway, kind of symbolic aspect of that, to enter the antechamber, to enter into the King's Chamber. But many who go there don't realize that above the King's Chamber are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 further chambers, the so-called relieving chambers, which it's been my privilege to get into a few times. And I'm just showing the top of the relieving chambers here. And that's what it looks like today. Yes, there is graffiti in there as well, mainly from 19th century travelers. But I didn't find my grandpa's name there. There's a curious resemblance between this structure and what is called the Jed Pillar, which represents the backbone of Osiris, the god Osiris, and is a symbol in the ancient Egyptian system for immortal life. And here now we're looking at the entry into the King's Chamber itself. I love this photograph just for the sense that it reminds us that when we visit the Great Pyramid, we're passing through history, and that many have been there before us. Napoleon, Alexander the Great, and Victorian ladies, you know, coming into the Great Pyramid just where we can stand today, and feeling this sense of awe as you enter the huge, bare, geometrical room that we know as the King's Chamber today. Really, the whole flimsy edifice of speculation that leads Egyptologists to argue that the Great Pyramid is a tomb for a pharaoh rests on that sarcophagus inside the King's Chamber. Oh, there's a sarcophagus there, so it must be a tomb. They don't consider the possibility that the sarcophagus had a ritual function, a function perhaps related to consciousness, but anybody who has lain down inside that sarcophagus, and particularly if you have toned inside that sarcophagus, to utter sound inside that sarcophagus, you immediately notice its resonance and its power. I believe that it was part of a ceremonial initiation that was meant to raise the consciousness of the initiate. That a certain state of mind was being inculcated with this journey. At any rate, if you look at the tomb paintings of the region of the sky called the Duat, or this underworld realm, this painting on the left is from the tomb of Thutmosis IV in the Valley of the Kings. You can see that it has these rising corridors and galleries, just as we find in the Great Pyramid. And indeed, boats were considered the vehicle for moving around the Duat, and that's why we find a gigantic boat buried beside the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid is meant to be a preparation during this life for the terrors and dangers of the journey we will face after death. And I would suggest that the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid forms the central function in the whole process, where something very important unfolded in the journey that we were expected to make after death. And that is called the weighing of the soul, or the weighing of the heart. And that often took place in a huge room that was approached up a sloping corridor, rather like the Grand Gallery. If you go up to Luxor and cross the river to the west bank, you'll find a small and actually quite unimpressive temple called Deir el-Medina. But inside it is an amazing tableau on the walls, which is a complete tableau of the scene called the weighing of the heart, which unfolds in a room that is variously referred to as the judgment hall of Osiris and also as the hall of Maat. The goddess Maat appears in this first image. She's wearing that feather on her head. The feather is the symbol of the goddess Maat, and she represents cosmic harmony, truth, and justice, balance, equilibrium. Everything that is right in the universe is represented by the goddess Maat. And what we see is the soul of the deceased being ushered into the hall of Ma'at. And immediately behind the standing figure of Ma'at, you can see that there's an enormous scales present. And those scales have two pans. And in the left-hand pan is an object representing the heart of the deceased. That symbolizes the soul of the deceased. And in the right-hand scale is the feather of Ma'at. Woe betide you when you come to that moment if your heart is heavy with sin and outweighs that feather. You need to be in balance when you get there, and your life was your opportunity to prepare to be in balance. The ancient Egyptians understood human frailty. They knew that we make mistakes and we make errors. That's partly why we're given long life, to have the opportunity to correct our errors, to fix the wrongs we've done, to become more nurturing through life and less toxic than perhaps we were at one stage. Our opportunity to learn and grow and develop, that's what life is. And an ancient Egyptian, looking back on his or her life, would want to look back on it rather as a sculptor might look on a work of art. That here I worked on this for many, many, many years, and here I made a mistake, and here I corrected it, and gradually towards the end, I made it better and better. And you want to look back on the end of it and say, I made some mistakes, but in the balance, I did good. That's what you want to say at the end of your life. And that's what's kind of summarized in this scene. And it's a very complex scene, and it's too much detail for me to go into at great length here, but you'll see up on the wall above these figures are lots of little figures. Actually, there's 42 of them. Those 42 little figures high up on the walls are what are called the 42 negative assessors. Negative assessors because they ask you 42 questions to which, ideally, you should be able to answer no. Did you kill? Did you steal? Did you insult the gods? Actually, all of the 10 commandments and 32 others are there as well. It all deals with moral behavior. And they are setting out the standards that we should aspire to. As I say, there's forgiveness in the ancient Egyptian system. There's room for us to make mistakes and learn and grow and develop, but we need to be aware of what we're here to do. And living a right life, living a life according to Ma'at, in harmony with the universe, which involves not harming others, not taking from the sovereignty of others, which involves giving love rather than generating hate. That's a key part of Ma'at in the ancient Egyptian system. But there's something else going on as well in this, and it concerns what I can only refer to as a gnosis. It's as though the moral aspect is necessary but not sufficient in the quest for the perfection of the soul. That we're supposed to do something else here in our life, in our many lives as well. And that is to achieve revelation, to achieve some kind of knowledge. It's not book learning. This has nothing to do with study or book learning. This has something to do with getting it, with getting the mystery of life. With understanding the incredible opportunity that we were given to be born in a human body, the opportunity to learn in this amazing garden of experience that we call the earth. With understanding that and getting it in a moment of revelation, understanding why we are here, to shed the illusions that the world plows down upon us, and to just understand we are spirit, we are soul. That is at the essence of what they called the weighing of words. And in a way, there's quite a strong parallel with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where they say meditation, love, ethics, none of these alone can bring enlightenment without wisdom. We're supposed to cultivate wisdom in this life, and wisdom is not book learning, it's gnosis. It's something that we finally get. If your life has been heavy with sin, if you have harmed and hurt and damaged others, if you've wasted the gift of life that the universe gave you, if you've wasted it horribly and evilly, then this is what awaits you in the ancient Egyptian system. Amit, the eater of the dead. He symbolizes annihilation, the end of the soul's journey. You do not come back. And there are certain acts, certain human acts that can earn that can earn an encounter with Amit. Those who steal the lives of others, they are not coming back to live their journey again, not according to the ancient Egyptian system. The ancient Egyptians strongly believed in reincarnation, that we did come back many, many times, but there were certain crimes that we could commit which would stop our journey entirely. This is something that, many who say, those who have religious beliefs do so because they find it comforting. There's nothing comforting about the ancient Egyptian system. It's really worrying. It makes you want to just consider everything you do, every minute of your life. Not a second should go by without attention to it, what's happening and your impact on others. But if you go through many lives and you gradually perfect your soul and you become more and more of a spiritual being, at the end of the time, you ask the god Thoth, the wisdom keeper, how long have I to live? And he answers, thou art for millions of years, a period of life of millions of years, and he writes the verdict on his tablet. And the ultimate objective, it's all symbolic in the ancient Egyptian language, but the ultimate objective, typified in this image from the book of what is in the Duat, where we see the soul rising up to the stars on the back of a serpent, the ultimate objective was to become a star and to shed life and light throughout the universe for millions and billions of years. And I don't think that any of what the ancient Egyptians were saying here was theoretical to them. It was based on profound exploration and experience conducted by their shaman priests. And this is one of the areas where my talk starts to get a bit controversial, because it is clear from research that's been done by Professor William Embodin and others that the ancient Egyptians did make use of visionary plants, that they did seek to deliberately alter consciousness. The kind of plants that we call hallucinogens today, a word that often provokes an immediate knee-jerk reaction in a culture that has been subjected to 40 years of propaganda called the war on drugs. I'd like to emphasize that I'm not here to advocate the use of any drug. What I am here to advocate is adult responsibility and adult sovereignty over consciousness. And thank you. And I do believe as adults that if we live in a society that does not allow us to make sovereign decisions over our own consciousness, then we cannot claim to be free in any way whatsoever. Because our consciousness is the most precious, the most sapient, the most intimate part of ourselves. And the keys to our consciousness cannot be held by our government. They have to be held by us as adults. And we must be the sole arbiters of deciding what we wish to experience or not experience with our consciousness, so long as we do no harm to others. And I will be touching more on the issue of visionary plants. It is interesting that the ancient Egyptian tree of life is a recognizable species of acacia, and that acacia is the Acacia nilotica. And the Acacia nilotica is rich in a powerful visionary substance called dimethyltryptamine, DMT for short. And extracting DMT from the bark of the acacia is a complicated chemical exercise. But ancient Egypt, after all, was the home of chemistry. The very word chemistry comes from the ancient name for Egypt, alchemt, or alchemy. The ancient Egyptians would certainly have been able to extract DMT from the acacia. And it's interesting that it's seen for them as the tree of immortal life. Here, Thoth is writing the name of the initiate on the tree of immortal life, which is an acacia. When ancient Egypt came to its end, after more than 3,000 years, what really brought the death of Egypt was a terrible combination of the jackboot of the Roman Empire with an extreme form of Christian fanaticism. That is what brought ancient Egypt to an end. And as ancient Egypt began to be crushed, it sought to pass its wisdom down to the future. and two streams of thought came out of ancient Egypt that are closely related. And one of those streams of thought are called the Hermetic texts. Hermes is actually just the Greek form of the ancient Egyptian wisdom god Thoth. That's who Hermes is. And the Hermetic text consists of dialogues attributed to Hermes, who is teaching various pupils, one of whom the best known is Asclepius. And actually what they do is they distill the high wisdom of ancient Egypt and put it into a more modern form. And they tell us, for example, that souls have at stake in this life their hope of eternity in the life to come, and that it's our duty not to acquiesce in our merely human state, but really we need to not be attached to the material realm. It is part of us. It is an important part of us. We're here to keep and tend the lower world, as the Hermetic text put us, but we shouldn't kid ourselves that that's what it's all about. What it's all about is the perfection of spirit. And that we need to despise that mortal part in a way, so that we can focus on the spirit. And the same ideas, even more strongly put, are put in the other stream that came out of Egypt, which is called Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is, I have to say, it's a very tough and difficult set of ideas. Very hard to accept some of it. But again, it's the result of deep thought and thousands of years of research. And in summary, Gnosticism is ideas or coherent systems that are characterized by an absolutely negative view of the visible world and its creator, and the assumption of a divine spark in man, his inner self, which had become enclosed within the material body as a result of a tragic event in the pre-cosmic world, from which it can only escape to its divine origins by means of a saving gnosis. And for the Gnostics, they're supreme dualists. They separate off the material and the spiritual realms entirely. They see reality in these starkly dualistic terms. And they see the world as the result of a fall from the perfection of God. That there was, again, it's a complex philosophy here, and I don't have time to go into it in enormous depth. But they see something they called the pleroma, the all, which is associated with the true God. And they saw that true God emanating certain forms that were called the aeons, all of which were pure goodness. But one of these, Sophia, who's also associated with wisdom, fell. She had a fall. And in that fall, out of the true spiritual realm, she created something called the demiurge. And that demiurge, in turn, created the world and created human beings. But the pleroma took pity on human beings and made sure that within us was a divine spark, even though we were lost in the realm of matter, in the realm of the world. And here's the really controversial thing about the Gnostics, and this is why the Christians started burning them at the stake, even though arguably Gnosis was the original form of Christianity. Because the Gnostics say that that entity, who the Old Testament calls Yahweh or Jehovah, he was the demiurge. They say he's not a real God at all. They say that the real God is far beyond that, and the creature that we've been taught to worship as a God is not God at all. He's some pumped-up supernatural entity who wants to be admired and worshipped and adored, and has this huge ego and enchains human beings as his eternal servants, and created entities called archons, evil angels, to keep mankind in chains. And certain teachers were sent to free us from the control of this demiurge. And one of those entities was Christ. The Gnostics saw Jesus Christ as the greatest Gnostic teacher who was sent to liberate us from the control of the demiurge. And you know, it's true. If you look at the behavior of the church, it's very different from anything that Christ says. Nowhere in the words of Christ, anywhere in the gospel, will you find Christ telling us to burn people at the stake, for example. No way. Christ is a beautiful, beautiful figure who brings true knowledge, true gnosis to the world. And he has, in a sense, been hijacked by the money men and the bureaucrats and the power mongers of the church in a misleading process. And Gnosticism, because it saw this clear, was one of the first victims of that fanatical literalist faction in the church that became the Roman Catholic Church and united with the power of Rome to crush ancient Egypt. The Gnostics were the first to be burnt at the stake in terrible, terrible ways for their beliefs, and went underground. And it's interesting that how the Gnostics take some of the familiar stories from the Bible, and again, this is, of course, highly heretical material, but we have been taught to believe that in the Garden of Eden, the serpent was the bad guy. But for the Gnostics, in the Garden of Eden, the serpent was actually the good guy. They say that what the serpent is doing is he's saying to mankind, wake up, remember who you are. You have to have knowledge. You have to know the difference between good and evil. You have to be able to make those choices. You can't remain in darkness. This is what the Gnostics say. So they don't see the serpent as an evil figure at all. They see the serpent as bringing the light of gnosis to mankind. And pointing out, the serpent does say in that story, after Adam and Eve have eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he said, didn't God tell you that you would die if you did this? Yeah, he did tell us that we would die. And did you die? No. What does that make God? That creature that you call God, if not a liar? Profoundly subversive and heretical material. But for that sin of seeking knowledge of good and evil, of fulfilling the potential of our consciousness, for that sin, Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden in a most humiliating and terrifying fashion. And angels were posted at the entrance to the garden with flaming swords to prevent us from ever gaining access to the tree of life. And it's interesting how the book of Genesis says, lest they become gods like us. Who are those us that's being spoken of in the book of Genesis? And here's a mysterious thing about the tree of life. Later Gnostic sects, because Gnosticism, although driven underground, survived, and it resurfaced in France in a form called Catharism. Gnostic sects had a very strange idea about what the tree of life was. It was a mushroom. And that's actually a recognizable species of visionary mushroom. That is the Amanita muscaria, that is the fly agaric, which is used in shamanistic ceremonies throughout the world. That some kind of eye-opening property in the mushrooms is being considered here. We'll come back to what that might mean. So the Gnostics, just as they turned the Garden of Eden story upside down, they turned the flood story upside down as well. It wasn't to punish evil, as the Old Testament tells us, but to punish humanity for having risen so high and to take the light, the gnosis that was growing amongst men. And the Gnostic texts say the survivors were thrown into great distraction and into a life of toil so that mankind might be occupied with worldly affairs and might not have the opportunity of being devoted to the Holy Spirit. And, throughout history, those who have sought the liberating gnosis, the light, the knowledge of the true nature of things, have been subjected to persecution. And I just want to briefly touch on the tragic story of the Cathars, who lived in what is now southwest France, in the area called the Languedoc, and who undoubtedly were a Gnostic form of Christianity. They held the figure of Christ in the highest order. And for him, he was, as I mentioned earlier, the supreme Gnostic teacher. But on the other hand, the Cathars regarded the Pope in Rome as the devil's agent on earth. And they utterly opposed the rule of the popes. And for that, the Gnostics earned the anger of the Roman Catholic Church. Unlike Roman Catholicism of that period, which wanted to keep the populace ignorant and illiterate, the Cathars promoted universal literacy. They believed in the absolute equality of men and women. They were the first paper makers in Europe because they were so keen on literacy. It really was truly a liberating doctrine that was taught in Catharism. And they created a wonderful, free, creative, artistic society. You've heard of the troubadours? They came from the Languedoc. They were originally from the Cathars. But as they flourished and grew, the Church of Rome became more and more angry with them. And finally, it sent a crusade against them. And that's called the Albigensian Crusades, because Albi was one of the cities in the Languedoc. And this was a terrible, terrible thing that happened back there in France in the 1200s. Terrible things were done to the Cathars. This entire religion, this entire culture, this entire way of life was utterly destroyed. Tens of thousands of people were murdered. Whole cities were razed to the ground. There was burning at the stake at an enormous scale. The books of the Cathars were all destroyed. I mean, just the worst thing that you can possibly imagine took place and happened to them. And by the mid-13th century, they were gone. They were utterly, utterly wiped out. And their memory would almost be lost to mankind. So that's what happens when you try to practice this ancient wisdom tradition that took the form of Gnosticism. You are in danger. And from the Gnostic point of view, the demiurge and his archons and their human servants, they're always trying to steal the light. And they're certainly trying to do so today. And if the light is growing amongst mankind, as I believe it is, then we can be sure that tremendous archonic forces are at work in the world to suppress it. We shouldn't close our eyes to this. We all want everything to be goodness, but we shouldn't close our eyes to the existence of evil. And we have to be alert and we have to be strong in order to confront that wickedness. So if the Gnostics were correct, then how, in what forms might we expect these forces to manifest? And again, I'm perhaps going to offend some people here, but I'm afraid that this is very clear to me that these are the forms, one of the forms that they manifest in. The mullahs and the priests and the rabbis of the orthodox mainstream religions who claim to interpose themselves between us and the divine, who walk the walk of peace and harmony. Sorry, I'm getting it the wrong way round. Who talk the talk of peace and harmony, but who walk the walk of hatred and division, who are responsible for almost all the conflict in the world today that is being generated, that is being divided us, that is dividing us from one another. And look at what they... Thank you. Thank you. I think what we have to do is we don't have to listen to what they say. We have to look at what they do. It's only 300 years since the Christian church stopped burning people at the stake. Can you imagine what it is to tie another human being to a fire and burn them slowly to death? What that person goes through, the absolute horror of that, done in the name of God. And it goes on, you know, the pedophile priests of the Roman Catholic Church and the huge cover-ups that have taken place regarding that. And in Islam, the stoning to death of innocent women goes on to this day in public spectacles, and all of this in the name of God. What kind of God are these people worshipping? Sounds much more to me like the demiurge that the Gnostics spoke of, rather than what all of us know is the true meaning of God. So I think the organized mainstream religions are part of this instrument of suppression of human consciousness that is meant to keep us away from the truth about ourselves. And I think another instrument is the state, the thing called the state, which... Thank you. Which seeks to impose itself upon us and make us children and take away from us the responsibility for ourselves, which tells us that it's going to do everything and all we have to do is just pay the taxes to empower that state. You know, what a clever trick they pulled. They use our own money against us. And they do it all over the world. And what are states in the business of except spreading fear and hatred and suspicion all around the world? from dividing us from one another, from promoting phantasmagorical doctrines like patriotism. I'm sorry, again, this may be offensive to some, but why should I feel any special loyalty to somebody who happened to be born on the same piece of land as me? That's no basis for loyalty. I want to come across each person I meet as the person they are. I don't care where they came from. I don't care what their background is. I don't care what the color of their skin is. I just want to know what their ideas are and how they are as a person, how they relate in the world. And that's what we should be loyal to one another as human beings, not divided from one another with these artificial constructs that the state creates. So I think the state is one of the huge instruments of evil in the world today. And I hope that the writing is on the wall for the big state and that we'll not see its further growth and power. And one other thing as well is a particular state of consciousness that our society worships. And that is what is called the alert problem-solving state of consciousness. I don't want to put that state of consciousness down. The alert problem-solving state of consciousness has its place. It has its place, but it's not the sum total of human consciousness. There's much more to us than that particular state of consciousness. You know the point. Bear this in mind. If you want to insult somebody in the modern world that venerates the alert problem-solving state of consciousness, what do you call them? You call them a dreamer. That's an insult in the modern world. But in ancient times, dreaming was considered a valid means of knowledge, a way to knowledge of the truth. So just consider this dominance of a particular state of consciousness. Now, the alert problem-solving state of consciousness has been responsible for quite a lot of good things. I have no problem with antibiotics. Antibiotics can be very helpful, and that's the result of the alert problem-solving state of consciousnness. And it's good, for Wall Street, and it's good for politics, and it's good for, the mundane aspects of science, and it's really important in war. But its day is over. The dominance of this state of consciousness is bringing us as a species to ruin. And thank you. And we can see that ruin everywhere around us, and it's closing in on our lives. And no matter how long they keep on printing more magical electronic money and throwing it at the problems that they themselves has created, sooner or later, we all know this system is coming down. This system is broken. It doesn't work anymore. It is utterly, utterly failing, even in terms of its own measures. And what other than a broken system could permit the specter of starvation of millions to take place, to continue year after year in the world? What other than a broken system, an insane system, could allow the horrendous destruction of that sacred realm called the Amazon jungle that is taking place today? Complete insanity, to cut down this old growth rainforest, to make farms to grow soya beans so we can eat hamburgers. What an insane idea. The lungs of our planet. Crazy. So in 2005, the Amazon River actually ran dry. Terrible things are happening in the Amazon. If you journey down the Amazon today, you see these huge flotillas of logs that are coming out of the rainforest, just destroying this place. It's as though we've become suicidal, that as a species we cannot get together and solve this problem of the Amazon, which fundamentally is actually quite an easy problem to solve. It's an economic problem. The people of the Amazon basin are very poor and in desperate need of funds. They often go off and start the slash and burn of the rainforest and plant little farms there, which then cease to be functional after 10 years. And then big business is in there in a massive way, cutting down the rainforest and making money out of it. But I did a back of an envelope calculation during the Iraq war, And what I figured is that actually 6 months of expenditure on the Iraq war could have solved the problem of the Amazon forever. All we need to do as an international community is to say to the peoples of that region, here is what you need. Look after the Amazon, garden it, preserve it for all of us as a global resource of biodiversity and as the lungs of our planet. It would cost pennies. You know, we can mobilize that sort of money for destruction, for war, for hatred, for chaos, no problem. We can mobilize that any time, but to mobilize it to preserve the sacred realm of the Amazon, for some reason we're incapable of doing so. Something is obviously deeply wrong with our society in that case. So this alert problem-solving state of consciousness is implicated in this, and there is a couple of other states of consciousness that are tolerated by our society. I like a drink myself, I have to confess, but you know, alcohol is glorified in our society. And you know, it's like you work incredibly hard all day, you know, to produce and consume, and then you can get completely bombed out on alcohol at the end of the day, and that's considered as acceptable by our society. And then the other thing is reality TV, you know, which is 24 hours a day just pumped out at us all the time. And at our children, you know, churning the brains of our children into mush. These states of consciousness are totally acceptable by our society, but all other states of consciousness are despised, hated, even criminalized. And I would say that our society does not support, but powerfully undermines those who seek to explore other states of consciousness, visionary states of consciousness. And I think we're being lulled by this global archonic culture into forgetfulness of our true purpose here, that our society doesn't want us awake and aware. It wants us asleep and oblivious. And frankly, we are not going to move forward to a new state of consciousness using the old state of consciousness. We can't do that. We have to find some other way to do it, to throw off these constraints. And the Gnostic system that came down from ancient Egypt, that has been shattered by 2,000 years of persecution, but in very unexpected places where you might never imagine, you will find people who are still honoring a system of direct spiritual revelation, direct spiritual knowledge. And one of those places is the Amazon jungle, where there are still uncontacted tribes who have never been polluted by contact with this engine of destruction that we call Western technology. And you know, it's interesting when you look at the Amazon that there are in fact 150,000 different species of plants and trees there. And indigenous shamans have an intimate knowledge of their properties, a knowledge based on thousands of years of direct inquiry. And I've spoken with shamans in the Amazon. You know, shamanistic cultures of the Amazon are not unaware of what is going on in the outside world. They're actually very, very, very disturbed by it. And it is impinging on them all the time with the bulldozers and the flotillas of logs being removed from the Amazon. And I've asked shamans, what do you feel is the problem with us? What is our fundamental problem and how do we fix it? And they say it's very simple. You in the West have severed your connection with spirit. And unless you reconnect with spirit, and unless you do it urgently, you are going to bring the whole human edifice down in ruins around us all. And for this reason, a kind of reverse missionary work is going on today. Shamans are coming out of the Amazon to teach us in the West, to help us to reconnect to spirit. And they do propose a specific remedy, and again I get controversial here, because that remedy is ayahuasca, the vine of souls, a powerful visionary brew that has been drunk in the Amazon for thousands of years. There's archaeological evidence of the use of ayahuasca in the Amazon going back more than 4,000 years. More than 70 different cultures in the Amazon use ayahuasca for contact with the spirit realm. although it contains the highly illegal substance called dimethyltryptamine that I spoke about earlier, it's interesting that all the countries around the Amazon basin have refused to bow to American pressure and have made ayahuasca absolutely legal in all of those countries. Not just legal, but protected as a fundamental human right. So ayahuasca contains two ingredients. One is that vine that you're seeing there, and the other is these leaves. And this plant is called chacruna in the Amazon, and its botanical name is Psychotria viridis. The botanical name of the ayahuasca vine is Banisteriopsis carpi, and the leaves here are Psychotria viridis. And these leaves contain quite large quantities of dimethyltryptamine, of DMT. Now, there's something you need to know about DMT, which is that it cannot be absorbed orally. So here's a mystery. How come it's being absorbed orally in the Amazon? How come it's being taken as a drink? Well, what it is that there's an enzyme in our stomachs called monoamine oxidase. And monoamine oxidase actually switches off DMT on contact. That's why you can't drink DMT. But there is a substance in the ayahuasca vine which is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off the monoamine oxidase in the gut and allows the DMT in the leaves to be absorbed orally. And it's a very simple, in one level it's a very simple technology, but in the other level, ask yourself, out of 150,000 different species of plants and trees, how did the shamans get these two together to be able to do this extraordinary visionary work? And they say it's very simple. The spirits told us which plants to bring together. So here's what the shaman does. He'll bust open lengths of the ayahuasca vine, place them in a cooking pot, add about 300 of those chacruna leaves, add more lengths of the ayahuasca vine, pour on water, and boil. That's simple as that. Boil for hours and hours and hours until the residue reduces down to quite a thick, sticky constituency in the bottom of the pot. Then you pour that off, usually into a plastic bottle these days, add more water, keep boiling again. At the end of about 24 hours, you have a liter or two of this dark brew that we see here. And I suppose that some in this audience have drunk ayahuasca. Thank you. Then you will, as I do, as you look at this cup of ayahuasca, I have no doubt that you are suppressing a slight shudder. Because ayahuasca, come on, let's face this, it's got to be one of the worst tastes on the planet. You know, I think of what? Old socks, raw sewage, some battery acid, and, you know, just a hint of chocolate. Nobody is taking ayahuasca for recreational purposes. Believe me, it is work. It is hard work. I've, over the years now, drunk ayahuasca rather more than 40 times. And every time I drink it, I have to prepare myself spiritually before I do so. And I have to brace myself for this work. I'm going back to Brazil at the end of January, and I'm going to be spending the whole of January settling my mind and cleansing my body and getting rid of the year's toxins and bracing myself for that journey. As is well known, those who've drunk ayahuasca will know, those who haven't may not, ayahuasca will make you vomit. It will give you diarrhea. Not doing it for fun. First time I had to drink ayahuasca in the Amazon jungle, and I knew about this, I knew this was coming, I was terrified. You know, we're quite inhibited in Britain. And I'm out there in the jungle, you know, sitting under the trees with a group of a dozen or so other people, and you know, I drink the ayahuasca, it's horrible, and then I start to sweat, and I'm feeling nauseous, and you know, the thought that I've got to run behind a tree, it's just almost too much to bear. But that was the first lesson that ayahuasca taught me, is that we are not our bodies, that the body is the least important part of ourselves, that an essential cleansing is taking place with this purging. Ayahuasca is called the purge in the Amazon. And that and we don't need to worry about that stuff. It's just a normal human function, you know. what really matters about ayahuasca, what it really speaks to, is our consciousness. And for those who've not drunk ayahuasca, the great artworks of Pablo Amaringo, an Amazonian shaman who I had the privilege to know, give some insight into the enchanted realm that ayahuasca takes our consciousness to. This enchanted jungle realm. Whether you drink ayahuasca in the middle of New York City or Tokyo or London or in the Amazon jungle, sooner or later it's going to take you into this enchanted realm. And it's been responsible for a huge explosion of art all around the world, artists working with ayahuasca. It seems whatever your creative gift is, ayahuasca will take it and enhance it. It was because of ayahuasca that I wrote my novel, Entangled. I was given the whole story of Entangled in a series of ayahuasca visions. And here's the work of Alex Gray and Robert Venosa on the right, artists who've worked with and been inspired by ayahuasca. And again, what they express is the sacred, enchanted, magical nature of creation. And something else that happens with the ayahuasca visions, and by the way, not every session will you have visions. There's all kinds of work goes on with ayahuasca. Some people have an ayahuasca session, go through the vomiting, go through the diarrhea, don't have visions, feel very disappointed. I say to them, be patient. It will come. Mother Ayahuasca has work to do with you. And that's often very serious work. Part of the ayahuasca experience, this is universal, everybody who works with ayahuasca encounters this sooner or later, is the life review, where you are required to look in depth at your own life and at the impact you have had upon others. It's very common in ayahuasca sessions that people start to cry. And the reason they're crying is because they suddenly get it. They suddenly realize how badly they hurt someone else. And how they never saw that from that other person's point of view before. It's a profound teaching tool, and it's very painful to realize the truth about yourself. Often people say, oh, it's so easy, you claim you get enlightenment from just drinking some drug. No, that's not what the enlightenment comes from. The ayahuasca just shows you the truth. The real work begins after that. Integrate those lessons into your life. Overcome a lifetime of bad habits. Make the changes that you know you need to make. That's where the real shamanic work begins with ayahuasca. I hope I'm not running out of time, but we're getting there. I'm going to share a personal story. I wasn't sure whether I would do this or not, but I feel that it's right to do so, which involves opening my heart to you a bit. And I'll say in advance of this that just to dispel any illusions about ayahuasca being a drug, it's called a medicine in the Amazon. To dispel any illusions about ayahuasca being a drug, bear in mind that in a number of clinics around the world today, ayahuasca is being used with fantastic success to get people off addictions to hard drugs, by which I mean cocaine and heroin. For example, the clinic run by Dr. Jacques Mabit at Tarapoto in Peru, which is called Taquihuasi. They bring heroin and cocaine addicts there, expose them to a dozen ayahuasca sessions over a period of a month, and more than half of them leave completely free of their addiction, with no withdrawal symptoms whatsoever, and never, never, never return to the drug that they've been addicted to, because they are shown the truth about themselves. Now, I knew this at the level of academic study, but I had an issue with the drug myself. And I don't want to, by the way, when I tell you this story, I want to be clear, I am not putting down marijuana, cannabis. I'm not putting it down. Cannabis is also a medicinal plant. And it has a role to play, and it has a medicinal role to play, and it can be valuable. But I began to use cannabis at the age of 37 in 1987, and it gradually crept up on me, where I was using it more and more and more and more and more. I got to the point by the 90s where I felt I couldn't write any book unless I smoked cannabis all day long. Later, I switched to a vaporizer. My son, Luke, pointed out to me that I was wrecking my lungs, and at the very least, I should take it in the form of steam rather than smoke. So I switched to a vaporizer, and I would fire up the vaporizer at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I would smoke marijuana or vaporize it all day until I went to bed at 2 o'clock the next morning. 7 days a week, 24-year, non-stop habit. strains of marijuana that I was smoking became stronger and stronger and stronger. And in latter years, long actually after I'd started to drink ayahuasca, the marijuana began to affect my behavior very badly. And the person who suffered most from these negative changes in my behavior was my beloved wife and partner, Santa, who I became very unkind to. And I became paranoid and suspicious and really crazy. And I would have huge arguments and say all sorts of terrible things, which I really didn't mean, but it just went on. And it was a terrible situation, and I was making her very unhappy. And then we went down to Brazil in October 2011, not very long ago. And we had 5 ayahuasca sessions together. And in those sessions, I was shown that I was standing on the edge of madness and standing on the edge of the abyss. And that if I continued to smoke, to abuse marijuana in the way that I was abusing it, if I continued to do that, I would be lost. And I understood the terrible pain that I had caused my wife with my aggression and the shouting and the paranoia that was afflicting me. And I came away from Brazil and I couldn't smoke marijuana again. It was like a magical healing. I just couldn't do it anymore. I put away my vaporizer. In fact, I got rid of it. I got rid of everything. And I haven't touched marijuana since then, not for a single minute, not for a single day. That's well over a year now. And I thought that my writing would be affected. I thought my writing would get worse. That was my fear if I stopped smoking marijuana. Quite the opposite has been the case. I used to spend all day puzzling over a sentence, just slowly. I felt lucky if I got 300 words done. Now I can write 3,000, 4,000 words a day, no problem. And my editors tell me they're good words. That monkey has been taken off my back, and that healing that I was given, I owe it entirely to ayahuasca. Ayahuasca showed me the truth about myself and made me fix it. So this, for me, is a great healing agent. And that's not just academic study, that's personal experience in my life. Martina Hoffman is an artist living in Boulder, Colorado, works a lot with ayahuasca. She's showing us a number of things in this painting. First of all, the only posture that we can really take in relation to Mother Ayahuasca, which is one of complete surrender. You can't fight this powerful entity that lies behind the ayahuasca vine. She is a teacher, she is love, she is pure love, but that love is sometimes tough love, as I experienced. Sometimes Mother Ayahuasca will give you a thorough kicking to make you get it about what you need to do. Sometimes she appears as a serpent, very often actually. Sometimes as a jaguar. She's a shapeshifter. She appears in many different forms. And ayahuasca is part of an ancient system. And that system is found worldwide. It doesn't always use, ayahuasca is only used in the Amazon, although it's spreading all around the world now. But that is shamanism. And the essence of shamanism is altered states of consciousness. And very many different techniques. Sometimes it's other visionary plants like peyote, for example, like psilocybin mushrooms. Sometimes it's rhythmic dancing. Sometimes it's certain kinds of meditation and music. Sometimes it's fasting. There are just so many ways in which it's possible to embrace altered states of consciousness. But they're all found in different forms of shamanism all around the world. And in these altered states of consciousness, it's very common for shamans to report encounters with intelligent entities. And those entities are construed by the shamans as spirits. And they sometimes take human form, but very often they take animal form. And very often they take the form called a therianthrope. That's from the Greek therion, which means wild beast, and anthropos, which means man. A therianthrope. And the shaman himself or herself may experience a transformation into one of these forms as he or she enters the spirit world. Now here's something very strange. It's a mystery. That many of the experiences that shamans report with spirits are really similar to the encounters with quote-unquote aliens that are reported by tens of thousands of people in the West who believe they've been abducted by UFOs. You know, we're supposedly dealing with two completely different domains here, spirits and aliens. But I want to show you that actually those domains are not as different as they might first appear. In fact, many of the shamans who do paint their visions are frequently depicting what we would call UFOs in those paintings, like these flying saucers up in the top of this painting by Pablo Amaringo. And when I saw that Pablo was painting flying saucers a lot from his ayahuasca visions, I said, what are these actually, Pablo? Are they, are they spaceships that are coming from other planets? He said, no, that's not what they are. He said they're vehicles for entering and leaving the spirit world. And when a shaman speaks of the spirit world, he's so close to the quantum physicist who speaks of a parallel dimension that I think we actually have to consider a possibility that this mystery that we call UFOs and aliens may not be about high-tech beings a bit like us but with higher technology coming from the other side of the galaxy. They may be coming to us from other dimensions of reality. I think we need to be open to that possibility. We have a mystery with the UFO abduction phenomenon. We don't yet have the absolute solution to that mystery. And the shamanistic insight into this is very, very interesting. Here's one of Pablo's classic paintings, a classic therianthrope, the head of a human and the body of a serpent, and then a flying saucer in the picture, those vehicles for entering and leaving the spirit world. If we want to know about what's called the phenomenology of shamanism, the experiences of shamans, you could get almost all the answers straight away by reading Mircea Eliade's massive book, Shamanism, which recounts the experiences of shamans all over the world. It's a fantastic dossier of evidence on shamanistic experience. And if you want a similar dossier on UFO abductees' experience, look at the work of John Mack, who was professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, who took UFO abductees seriously and recorded thousands of hours of interviews with them. And by comparing these two bodies of evidence, we find something very interesting. That shamans most frequently encounter the beings that they think are spirits in the form of animals and birds or fish or therianthropes. And interestingly, although the gray is the typical alien image in our culture today, actually if you go into detail, you find that UFO abductees very frequently encounter the aliens as animals first. So, you know, Virginia Horton sees an intelligent gray deer and says there's a person inside that deer. Another American sees a deer looking at her through her window just before she's abducted. Another sees a wolf standing on her bed. And John Mack summarizes his patient's reports that the aliens appear to be consummate shapeshifters, often appearing initially to the abductees as animals. Owls, eagles, raccoons, and deer are among the creatures the abductees have seen initially. What about the mechanism of abduction, being floated up into the sky, very commonly reported by shamans, or climbing threads of light? Shamans report that, and I show some images from the Kalahari, from South Africa, of San Bushmen who've painted this process of climbing threads of light to the spirit world. And again, if you get into detail, you find that UFO abductees report exactly the same thing, being floated up into the sky to a spaceship or actually climbing threads or ropes of light. Many abductions of shamans by spirits don't take place into the sky, they take place underwater or underground. And again, exactly the same is true for UFO abductees, that Betty Aho is abducted by a UFO which plunges into the sea and eventually enters huge crystalline caverns. Beto Cardenas is taken under the sea. Carlos Diaz finds himself in a cave with stalactites and stalagmites, and the UFO is in there. And this is just identical again and again and again to the experiences reported by shamans that they construe as abductions by spirits. Probably the defining characteristic of the shamanistic experience is called the shamanic ordeal, where the shaman experiences himself being just torn apart by the spirits, with the strange kind of surgery being conducted on his body, objects being inserted into his body, under the skin of his arm, into his brain, being pierced painfully. And of course, this is no different from the experience of UFO abductees, who again and again speak of surgery being conducted on them by the aliens, of inserts and objects being placed into their body. Even extraordinary things like here, Sandra Larson is abducted by a UFO. Beings removed her brain and set it down beside her. And then we have a Yakut shaman. The spirits cut off his head, which they set aside. These two seemingly different domains are very, very similar. Shamans are always having sex with spirits. I know a shaman in the Amazon whose wife has left him because of his relationships in the spirit world. He's even got kids over there, And again, that's also true of UFO abductees. They're constantly being involved in sexual activity with aliens and having hybrid children, which they're re-abducted to nurture. And here's some other curious things. Here's the 12th century painting. We see this object in the sky with eyes in it, and we see the impregnation of a woman, and we see a little entity holding a mushroom, in the painting. And those eyes are very similar to the eyes that are experienced with dimethyltryptamine, and very similar to accounts of UFO abductions. And this painting from 1710, the baptism of Christ, what is that in the sky up there? What is going on in that painting? And how similar it is to Pablo's vehicles from the spirit world. And many shamans experience being given a book by the spirits. Maria Sabina, a mushroom shaman from Mexico, was given a book from which she learnt many things and helped people who need help and know the secrets of the world where everything is known. And the books are also given to UFO abductees. Betty Hill is given a large book by the leader of the aliens. And just like Maria Sabina, she's not allowed to bring it back to Earth. The same happens with Betty Andreasson. And both UFO abductees and shamans often return from their experience with a sense of mission. So here's another domain, supposedly separate, the domain of fairies and elves. Why do they have so much in common with aliens and spirits? Please do read this book, Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée, which was the first book to draw attention to the bizarre parallels between fairy lore and alien abduction lore, published in 1969. And what I did in my book, Supernatural, one of the things I did was to take that dossier of evidence forward from 1969 right through to today, because we have much more evidence on UFO abductions since then, and the parallels are absolutely stunning. Again, I have to cut a long story short, but fairies were in the business of abducting people, just like aliens, just like spirits. You did not want to get close to the fairy dance. If you touch that fairy dance, you're going to get drawn into it, and bang, you're going to find yourself in another world just like that. And they might entertain you there, and you might feel that some hours have passed, a pleasant afternoon perhaps, before they return you, except you discovered that it wasn't 3 hours, it was 300 years that passed. Well, it's a bit like the phenomenon that UFO abductees call missing time. Maybe the abductors have become a little kinder since then. Now it's not 300 years, it's 3 hours we lose. Maybe the fairy dance is a kind of early form of UFO technology for moving in and out of that other realm, whatever it is. Fairies could be cruel. They tortured people just like spirits, just like aliens, but they also gave gifts and healing powers. Fairies had the power of flight. They used aerial vehicles, construed as flying boats and flying castles and flying carriages. Fairy abductions would sometimes take place to the sky, sometimes underground, sometimes into the hollow hills. We see in the lower image a group of beautiful fairy maids persuading a young man to come into the hollow hills. And in both images, we see a mushroom, identifiable clearly as an Amanita muscaria in the upper image, probably psilocybes in the lower image. Fairies often appeared as animals or as therianthropes. This thing of the serpent human is very universal, widespread experience, which is found all around the world, and it's part of this therianthropic mystique. So everybody's heard of Theseus and the Minotaur. The Minotaur is a bull man. Here we see from Akkad in 1800, a bull man wrestling with a lion. All of the gods of ancient Egypt are classic shamanistic therianthropes, part animal, part human in form. The oldest piece of art to have come down to us from anywhere in the world comes from Fumani Cave in Italy. It is 35,000 years old, and it shows a creature with the head and horns of a bull and the body of a human being, a classic therianthrope, like this lion man from Hollenstein-Stadel cave in Germany, 32,000 years old, or this bison man from Chauvet in France. And bison men are found all over the painted caves of France for tens of thousands of years. Or this creature, part stag, part wolf, part owl, part horse, part human. Let's look again at that bison man from Chauvet cave in France. What could possibly have inspired such imagery? Let's think about this seriously. This is not the kind of stuff you see in everyday life. You don't see this when you're out hunting animals on the plains. Where do you see it? Let's pull back and look more closely at that image. That image, as well as the bison man, we have a female figure in that image. A large female figure. Look at her closely. Weirdly, she's headless, but her right arm is transforming into the head of a lion, like these lions down below in the image here. So this is not somebody dressed up in skins. We are looking at a classic image of shape-shifting here. This is an entity caught in the process of transition between human and animal form, between woman and lion, bison man and lion woman. Go to South Africa thousands of years later, thousands of miles away, and you can find humans transforming into animals, perched on a zigzag, transforming into antelopes, or these antelope men, also from South Africa, about 8,000 years old, from the Drakensberg Mountains, head of antelope, body of human being. This one's also growing feathers, by the way. And from Los Casares cave in Spain, what are these creatures that are depicted tens of thousands of years ago? Or this strange humanistic vision from Angoulême in France with the high domed forehead and just the hint of an eye and a narrow pointed chin, and this extraordinary figure from Peshmerga, which Santha and I have sat in front of for hours and contemplated. Do you see what's going on here? There's something up in the sky above that figure, and there's the high domed forehead and the narrow pointed chin, the dark eyes, and the figure is also pierced in some ways. And if we go and look closer at that head, we've done a redrawing of it here. Isn't it similar to the classic gray that we're familiar with in modern Western culture? And what about these objects, which are found painted on cave walls all over the place? This from Altamira and this from Bernifal on the left. And how similar they are to those spirit vehicles that Pablo Amaringo spoke about, which he depicts as flying saucers. Three of these images, of these three images, two were created more than 20,000 years ago on the walls of painted caves. And one was created in 1990 by one of John Mack's patients. And she said that every time the aliens came to abduct her, they projected this image into her visual field. I think the same inspiration is behind all of these images. And the modern one is the one top right, and the other two are both more than 20,000 years old. Again, I must rush. I must cut a long, long story. Very short indeed. But to cut that long story short, there is the work of Professor David Lewis Williams, who is the professor of anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. And he has made a breakthrough in the study of cave art. And it took him more than 20 years to get that breakthrough accepted. But it is now universally, almost universally accepted in academia. Cave art isn't about hunting magic. It's not about structuralism. All these old theories have now been thrown away. Cave art, it's absolutely evident and manifest from the nature of the art itself, is an art of visions. It is shamanistic art. Whoever was making these paintings were experiencing the profoundly altered states of consciousness that are common to shamans all around the world. And when they returned to normal consciousness, they were depicting on the walls of the cave what they had seen in the visionary state. The patterns, the therianthropes, the flows of dots, everything are characteristic of visionary states of consciousness. Here are some of David's important works, academic works on the origins of cave art in what he calls the neuropsychological theory of cave art. And again, I can't go into this in detail, but a lot of his evidence is drawn on work done with hallucinogens and human volunteers before the war on drugs largely stopped that important work taking place. And all of the images that we see on the cave walls are depicted as part of their experience by those human volunteers in these studies that were done in the 50s and 60s. And there on the right of the diagram, you see a man in a modern business suit with the head of a fox that was depicted by a modern volunteer under the influence of mescaline. Pretty much identical to that lion man and that bison man from the painted caves tens of thousands of years ago. Something universal is going on here. So finally, science is caught up with David Lewis Williams, and New Scientist now admits this cave painting as the earliest evidence for magic mushroom use in Europe. But of course, that evidence was present in the nature of the art all the time. It's classic visionary art. We don't need to have the mushrooms actually painted on the cave wall to know that. But it helps that they're there. So this diagram I call 6 million years of boredom. This is the human family tree from the last common ancestor with the chimpanzee through until anatomically modern humans, namely us. And the last common ancestor with the chimpanzee was about 6 million years ago, and anatomically modern humans emerged about 195,000 years ago. The earliest surviving anatomically modern human skeleton is from Ethiopia. It's 195,000 years old. It's not to say that older ones won't be found, but that's the earliest that's been found. Let's look at what our ancestors did during that 6 million years. Well, honestly, for most of it, they did very little. Didn't invent stone tools until 2.5 million years ago. There's the first stone tools, the Aldewan stone tool tradition. Once they'd invented them, they stuck with the same tool without any changes for more than 1 million years. No lateral thinking, no stepping outside the box. We've got this, and we're just going to repeat it. So it shows that cultural knowledge was being passed down, and it shows a very narrow, rigid frame of mind. And then when they did invent a new stone tool, the Acheulean stone tool tradition, why, they stuck with that without change for another 1 million years. And even after we became anatomically modern, that rigidity remained in place. We had the hardware, but we didn't have the software yet. And then suddenly, about 40,000 years ago, all around the world, it's as though a light has been switched on in the human brain. And that's the moment when the great cave paintings begin to appear. And where Picasso, when he went into Lascaux, came out stunned in the 1940s. He said, "We have invented nothing." One of our greatest artists could not compete with those cave artists. We've invented nothing. And everywhere throughout the caves, the absolute evidence in the nature of the paintings of trance states, of altered states of consciousness. And at the same moment that our ancestors embrace those trance states, those altered states of consciousness, and start depicting their visions on the walls of the caves, we take what is now accepted as the single greatest leap forward in the evolution of human behavior. Everything about humanity changes. We become spiritual beings. We start burying food and water with our dead. It tells us that our ancestors suddenly believed that we survive death, that something goes on of the spirit. Hunting tactics, everything about humanity radically, radically improved. And it's really hard to resist the conclusion that there is a connection, that the embracing of altered state of consciousness was fundamental in bringing us forward out of millions of years of rigidity. And again, I'm going to get controversial, but Francis Crick, who discovered the double helix, it wasn't the beer at the Eagle Pub in Cambridge. Francis Crick was a regular user of LSD. It was legal then in the 1950s. And he admitted off the record that he'd first perceived the double helix shape while he was on LSD. And he said, "If you report this, I'll sue you." Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak weren't so shy about the involvement of altered states of consciousness in the incredible breakthroughs that they made with the Apple computer, that they would never have made those breakthroughs if it hadn't been for their experiences with LSD. As I say, I'm not here to advocate drugs. I'm here to advocate adult responsibility, that we have the right to make decisions about our own consciousness. And what emerges from all of this evidence and all of this research is that the states of consciousness induced by these despised and hated visionary substances, hated by our society, victimized and villainized by the war on drugs. You can go to prison for 30 years for being caught with DMT. What emerges is that they are not brain candy. Whatever they are profoundly transformatory I think our society grotesquely misuses psychedelics if they are used for recreation. Psychedelics are sacred substances. They should not be used for recreational purposes. Go use other stuff for recreational purposes, you know? But not the psychedelics. Psychedelics are extremely serious business. They need to be treated with absolute respect and reverence and awe. If we're going to work with psychedelics, it needs to be done in a ceremonial setting with those who know what they're doing. The space needs to be controlled. The role of the shaman is key. And we in the West have been inhibited for more than 40 years by developing our own indigenous, from developing our own indigenous form of shamanism by the war on drugs. We need to, these substances are being used everywhere. The war on drugs isn't working, it's broken, it's failed, it's had absolutely no success whatsoever. It's total failure, total failure. Billions, trillions of dollars of money have been wasted. You know, the classic example, I have to say this with the war on drugs, you get sent to prison for taking drugs, and every one of the drugs that you get sent to prison for taking, its use has just increased more and more in our society. We never got sent to prison for smoking tobacco. We were just given good advice. And look what's happened to tobacco in our society over the last 20 years. It's fallen way, way down. You know? What does that tell us? Adults, given honest information, will make appropriate decisions. We don't need the state to make these decisions for us. And interestingly, some scientists are now just dipping their toes in the water of psychedelic research again. Some very interesting research is being done with psilocybin. And it's been discovered in a detailed study that more than half of the participants in the study described their psilocybin experience as the single most important spiritual experience of their lives. Imagine if the vicar could say that about church on Sunday. You know, and terminal cancer victims, given psilocybin, lost their fear of death. They suddenly realized that life goes on, that they had nothing to fear. Psilocybin is closely related to DMT, to dimethyltryptamine. And I'm going to close, I promise not more than another 5 minutes, with the work of Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico. Dr. Rick Strassman is the professor of psychiatry at the University of New Mexico. And in the 1990s, he was given permission by the federal government to do work with dimethyltryptamine in human volunteers. And his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, is of fundamental importance, and I do urge you all to read it if you haven't done so already. It documents this astonishing research project. And what Rick Strassman's volunteers, as I mentioned, you can't absorb DMT orally, so Rick Strassman gave it to his volunteers as an intravenous infusion, so it goes straight into the brain without passing through the stomach. You can't get addicted to DMT, by the way. Given in that form, it's like a rocket ship to the other side of the universe. You know, ayahuasca comes on slowly, but smoked or injected DMT, and you know, there's no negotiation with it. You just take off, and the place you go to is utterly strange. And what Rick Strassman's volunteers reported was astonishing, that many, many, many of his volunteers who weren't comparing notes had experiences that were phenomenologically inseparable from the experiences of UFO abductees. The probing, some of them encountered elves, some of them went to space stations, some had objects placed under their skin, some encountered insect creatures, some found beings all around them that were ready for them, absolutely identical. Again, I don't have time to give you the full details. Quite a number of them encountered entities who said something really strange to them. Remember, these people were not comparing notes. What those entities said to them was, "We're so glad you've discovered this technology. Now we can communicate with you more easily." Strange, huh? Yes. And here's the funny, funny thing. We're all illegal in this room. Every one of us. Because DMT is a natural brain hormone. It is found in the human body, usually in subpsychedelic quantities, in blood plasma, urine, cerebrospinal fluid, and we don't know its function. But Rick Strassman's research and others suggest very strongly that the DMT is produced in the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is the third eye. The pineal gland in evolutionary older animals is in fact an eye. It has a lens, a cornea, and a retina. In humans, it's sunk deeper into the brain, but maybe it's still a sense organ. And maybe it's making DMT as its lens, as a kind of sixth sense, if you like. And to cut a long story short, I keep saying that, but I have to do that. You know, I'm running terribly over time. Again, is that Rick Strassman suggested this, that what UFO abductees may be is people who spontaneously overproduce DMT, which puts them into a trance state and when they have these experiences. And it's really important for me to now emphasize, I would be doing Rick Strassman terrible injustice if I did not, that for him that does not mean that their experiences are not real. It doesn't mean that their experiences are manufactured by the brain. He thinks their experiences are absolutely real, and that what they're gaining access to is another level of reality. And by the way, when I speak of other levels of reality, I don't deny the physical aspects of the UFO abduction experience. Remember that idea that the flying saucers may be vehicles for moving between dimensions, physically. But what's interesting is what happens at the level of consciousness. And what Rick is suggesting, to cut a long story short, brings us back, sorry, I just keep saying that. I'm very conscious of the passage of time, and I'm eating into the next speaker's session, so I'm going to stop really soon. But what Rick is saying is using that model that I showed at the beginning of the brain as a receiver of consciousness, not as a generator of consciousness. And he's suggesting that most of us, most of the time, are tuned into what he calls channel normal, but that with DMT, we can alter the receiver wavelength of the brain and gain access to realities that are normally invisible to our senses, that become briefly and temporarily visible. And he's saying that these worlds are usually invisible to us and our instruments and are not accessible using our normal state of consciousness. However, just as likely as the theory that these worlds exist only in our minds is that they are in reality outside us and freestanding. If we simply change our brain's receiving ability, we can comprehend and interact with them. And just a quick analogy, the scientist, the materialist scientist, Richard Dawkins, you know, who puts somebody under the influence of DMT or psilocybin and puts them in an MRI scanner, will see certain areas of the brain light up. That scientist then says, the visions that person's having, they're not real, it's just brain activity. It's just that brain activity, those changes in the brain that I see there. What incredibly bad and stupid logic that is. And here's the analogy that explains why. We want to look at a star. We take our little telescope. We point it at a region of the sky. We focus the telescope. When we focus the telescope, physical changes take place inside the barrel of the telescope in the relationship between the lenses. Eventually, the star comes into view. We would be totally wrong to say the star is the physical changes inside the barrel of the telescope. No, those physical changes simply allowed us to see the star. And that's the suggestion of what's happening with DMT in the brain. So maybe we don't need the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland, in order to penetrate the secrets of parallel realms. Maybe we already have that instrument inside our skulls. It's called our brains. And maybe we have to be in altered states of consciousness in order to gain access to those realms. So, you know, we humans, we can't see something without interpreting it. And what I'd suggest is that aliens, spirits, fairies, they're all the same phenomenon, viewed through different cultural spectacles over thousands and thousands of years. We do perceive according to our culture. It's not an accident that today, when we're starting to explore the universe, we're construing them as aliens, but we don't know what they are. What we do know is that time to time down the ages, these contacts with these others, whoever they are, have been responsible for bringing us the forbidden fruit of gnosis. And with that, let's review again the Garden of Eden. And let's look at that serpent in the Garden of Eden, which is almost always depicted as a therianthrope, with the head of a human and the body of a serpent. And let's remember what was done to us when we ate of the tree of knowledge, how we were driven out of the Garden of Eden by that cruel demiurge. And in this mystery, I believe, is tied up the mystery of knowledge of good and evil and the mystery of immortal life. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. you. Thank you.